Welcome to this Make a Medic video on how to approach the MRCP Part 1 and Part 2 exams. My name is Lasith Ranasinghe. I'm the founder of Make a Medic and I'm currently an ACCS anaesthetics trainee based in London. I sat the MRCP exams back in 2022 when I was in my F2 year and managed to score quite highly in both exams, and I attribute this largely to a specific technique that I put into practice when preparing for them, and I'll be sharing that with you in this video. Before I go any further, I just wanted to clarify the reason for me doing the MRCP, as this is something that I get asked about quite often. MRCP is a requirement for anyone who plans on training in a medical specialty in the UK. I'm an anaesthetics trainee and it's not compulsory for anaesthetics trainees to complete the MRCP. However, some people choose to do it because it can get you a few extra points for higher specialty training in anaesthetics and intensive care. I personally chose to do it because I have a keen interest in intensive care medicine, and as an F2 before starting anaesthetics training, it was the only relevant postgrad exam that I was able to sit at the time. Please note that the scoring systems for higher specialty training that I've just mentioned do change quite regularly, so if MRCP isn't compulsory for you, please do check how it would benefit you in your own respective specialty. Let's talk briefly about the format of the exams. Both Part 1 and Part 2 consist of single best answer questions, and each exam, for example, the Part 1 exam, will consist of 2 papers that you sit on the same day, and each paper contains 100 SBAs that you have 3 hours to complete. There will be a break between the papers for you to freshen up and have something to eat, so in total you'll be answering 200 SBAs and have 6 hours to complete both papers. And as of 2024, these exams are still conducted online with remote invigilators. In terms of the resources available to you when preparing for MRCP Part 1 and Part 2, it can broadly be split up into books, courses, and SBAs. I personally only use SBAs to prepare for the exams, and I believe that this is by far the most important category of the resources available. My rationale was that a lot of MRCP consists of building upon existing baseline medical knowledge from medical school, and hence going through as many SBAs as you can is the best way to acquire this information efficiently. I used both the past test and past med question banks. I felt that past test questions were generally of a better quality and better represented the standard expected for the exams. That being said, the more SBAs the better, so I ended up completing both question banks. For full disclosure, I have previously partnered with Past Test to produce some guidance videos about the MRCP. However, this video is not sponsored. I started using Past Tests long before collaborating with them. The key with SBAs is to start early and do them all. Don't fall into the trap of trying to do book learning or attending courses and saving the SBAs for a later date. It's much better to just get started and get through as many SBAs as possible. Even if you complete both banks ahead of your exam, by the time you get to it, you can repeat the questions and it's unlikely that you'll really remember the answers because there are just so many to get through. Before I demonstrate the specific approach that I used when preparing for MRCP Part 1 and 2, let me explain my rationale for using it based on a diagram. When doing SBAs, I found that my brain acted like a net, where I was trying to catch as much of the core knowledge from SBAs as possible. At the top, we have the SBAs that you're consuming. Each circle represents a key point that you're trying to learn from doing an SBA. Some of it will stick when you first encounter a set of SBAs, but inevitably there will be several points that slip through the cracks. There's no more annoying feeling than remembering that you did an SBA on a certain topic several weeks ago, where you can't recall the specificities of the learning points and have no way of relocating that specific SBA and revising the content. This is why I created a second net to catch some of these points that slip through the first net. Some people may think that they already do this by making notes as you go along. However, I'd argue that there is a much more effective manner in which you can construct your second net. This involves leveraging the power of spaced repetition platforms to enable you to systematically plug the gaps in your knowledge. So this is just a quick demo of the method that I use to prepare for MRCP Part 1 and Part 2, and it is actually something that's applicable to any written medical exam that you can think of. and it's certainly something that I've used ever since around final year of medical school. So I'd focus on using question banks. So PassTest and PassMed are the two that I used to prepare for MRCP Part 1 and Part 2. And also, to be honest, throughout medical school as well, I found these resources very helpful. So I'd have two tabs open. One of them would be the question bank, in this case PassTest, and the second would be a spaced repetition platform. And the one that I tend to use is Brainscape. Another commonly used platform is Anki. However, I'm personally more familiar with Brainscape. I think it's laid out very clearly and simply, and it's quite quick to actually make cards, as I will show you in a second. So I'd have some sort of deck open. In this case, it's MRCP Part 1. Obviously, it's a deck that I've already made before, and there's over 800 cards in it already. And just before I forget, I'll leave the links to both the MRCP Part 1 and Part 2 Brainscape decks that I've created in the description below, in case you'd like to use them yourself. So I'd go through some questions. And I personally prefer just to do the questions randomly. I don't tend to select it topic by topic, just because when you come to the real exam, you're not going to spend 3 hours just focusing on cardiology. There's going to be a mix of questions, so you kind of need to be on your toes the entire time. That's my rationale for choosing to do them randomly, but I know that some people prefer to do it topic by topic. It's completely up to you, but my personal preference is doing questions in a random assortment. So here we have a question on PassTest. If you'd like, please do pause the video to have a good read through yourself. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move promptly onwards, just because what I'm trying to showcase is the way that I use SBAs to create that gap deck that I was talking about. So with this question, you've had a read through, and let's say you think it's dexamethasone, the correct answer. So even if you get the question right, it's worth having a look through the explanation provided in case there's any key learning points that you'd like to commit to memory and ensure that you can revisit in your gap deck at a later stage. So if we scroll down, it says here that the patient's pain is most likely due to liver capsule pain as a result of edema resulting from the hepatic metastases. And it suggests that steroids are a good option for reducing that edema. So my interpretation of this is that liver capsule pain resulting from edema due to hepatic metastases may respond well to corticosteroids rather than just further opioids. So from that learning point, I can make a quiz card. So remember, this shouldn't just be a statement, it should be a question that requires you to think of an answer. So it's not just a case of making flashcards with random blocks of prose on it. It should be something that prompts some sort of thought process, which requires you to dig deep into your brain to try and find that nugget of information, or at least consolidate it if it has slipped through the net. So here's an example. So in this case, I've gone with, other than opioids, what treatment may be effective in the management of liver capsule pain in a patient with edema secondary to hepatic metastases? I know that sounds fairly specific, but I think it's important that these questions are kept as specific as possible, because you really are trying to drill in those specific bits of information which can be tested in MRCP Part 1 and Part 2. So there we go. We've got one question that we've created based on the SBA that we've just done. It really doesn't take much time at all. It probably adds an extra 30 seconds per SBA that you decide to write a question on. And I promise you it really is worthwhile further down the line. So I would mainly focus on doing SBAs as much as I can, but then a couple of times a week, I try and smash through as many of the gap deck cards as I could. And that's a really good way of making sure that knowledge that you've recently acquired is revisited on a relatively regular basis. And that's how you actually make sure you're committed to your long-term memory. So this is what Brainscape looks like. Anki looks fairly similar, but the principle is that you get asked a question, you think to yourself, what's the right answer? And then you rate your confidence and be honest with yourself, because you're not trying to kid anyone. You just want to make sure that you use the spaced repetition algorithm as well as possible. So let's say with this question, I'm not actually that familiar with the topic. I don't feel that confident in the answer, and hence I'm going to give it a 1 out of 5. So all that does is that the algorithm lists that question as something that I'm quite weak on. So hence it will bring that question back to the top of the deck more frequently, just so that I can build the confidence and eventually give it a higher and higher rating moving forwards. Conversely, if I'm happy with the answer for a question, I'm quite confident with the answer, then I can give it a 5. But essentially, as you can see, you can get through these questions very, very quickly. You can get through them on the go as well. There's a mobile app that allows you to do questions whilst you're on the tube or traveling to work or whatever. So as you can see, the beauty of this algorithm is that it makes sure that it plugs these gaps in your knowledge in a very systematic way and is very, very quick to go through. So in an hour, for example, you may be able to get through perhaps 30 SBAs, whereas I reckon in an hour you could get through a good 200 flashcards if you just plowed through. So that's the beauty of this gap deck method, is that it enables you to go through the weak points in your knowledge, the gaps in your knowledge, in a very quick fire way. And it has this mechanism in place for bringing back to your attention topics that you weren't particularly confident on. So essentially it's the perfect mechanism for actually targeting and reinforcing the gaps in your knowledge. So the technique that I use really is very simple, and it's something that everyone can put into practice very easily. I know that it can seem like a hassle to be making the flashcards as you go along with your revision, but it really does save you a huge amount of time in the long run and enables you to reinforce your knowledge base. So start doing SBAs early and get through as many of them as possible. Create your gap deck as you go along and review your gap deck once every few days. I hope this video was useful and good luck for your exam.